Hello my friends, welcome back to this implementation, and here we go with a new code section we're going to implement together, which will exactly implement that specific step of the pipeline where Lambda reads the data in S3. Alright, so let's do this. We're going to do that in the form of a function, so we're going to start with def, and we're going to call that function, to make things super clear, read underscore CSV from S3. Perfect, then we add some parentheses, and it's actually going to take as argument the S3 URL of your data. Okay, so I'm just going to enter the name of the argument here, S3 URL, not to confuse with data S3 URL, which was our environment variable. So we keep that, and then colon, and here we go. Let's implement that function from scratch, because once again, we were not able to add a layer including pandas in our Python environment because of a size issue. But that's good, it's a little bit of coding practice, so here we go. First, we're going to get the name of our data bucket. And for this, I'm going to introduce a new variable, which I'm going to call bucket name. Okay, bucket name. And so, how are we going to extract the bucket name from the S3 URL? Well, by just using some little tricks. First, we're going to take our S3 URL, which is our argument. Then we're going to add a dot, because we're going to call the split function, which will basically split the data S3 URL right here into the different parts of that URL that are separated by a slash. And all these different parts will be included into a list. So you see, HTTPS colon will be the first element of the list, then the second element of the list is empty because of the two consecutive slashes. Then ML pipeline data bucket random number S3 Amazon AWS.com will be the third element of the list, and then one quality.csv will be the fourth element of the list. And so we do this split so that we can extract the bucket name, the name of our data bucket, which is exactly this. So to do so, we're just going to use some tricks. We're going to split this whole data S3 URL through the slashes first to get what's after the two slashes here, and then another split through this time the dots to get what's before that dot here. And to do so, I'll show you how to do it. Here, in the first split, you need to enter in quote the character through which you want to do the first split, which is the slash. And then, in order to take what's after the two slashes here, you need to enter the index 2. If you wanted to take what's on the left of the first slash, you would enter the index 0. If you want to take what's between the first and second slash, you would enter the index 1. And if you want to take what's after the second slash, you need to enter the index 2. Okay, that's how it works. So here, in a pair of square brackets, we enter the index 2. Okay, and then I'll let you do the second split. Try to pause the video and do it. I'm going to do it now. Then we add dot split again. We call again the split function. Then parentheses. Then in quotes, we enter the character through which we want to do the second split, which is a dot this time. And then remember, we want to take what's on the left of that first dot. That's the first dot here in the data S3 URL. And so in order to get the final bucket name, well, we're going to enter the index 0 to take what's on the left here because it's the first element of the list. Okay, so here we go. Right here after the split, we enter a pair of square brackets and we enter the index 0. And you can check on Google Colab or any Python environment. This will exactly extract the bucket name from your S3 URL. All right, now next line of code. So now what we need to get is the file key, which is just a path to the CSV file within the S3 bucket. And since in our S3 bucket we don't have any folders, well, the file key is very simply the direct path to the CSV file. But since we want to generalize this, we're going to still extract it from the S3 URL. And so here we go. We're going to call our S3 URL again, from which we're going to call, there you go, the split function again. And this time, according to you, what is it going to do the split through? Well, we're going to use the slash again, because basically if we look at our data S3 URL again, we basically need to access this, right? Onequality.csv. So we're going to use the slash. And so now I'm asking you, which index should we enter? It must be what's on the right of that last slash, which is the first, second, and third slash. So of course the index will be this time 3. But actually, let's generalize this even more. Here we just have the CSV file, but imagine we had some folders, then we would have some other slashes. And in that case, in order to include the full path through all the folders towards your final CSV file object, well, you need to make sure that you include all the different slashes. And so here, in the pair of square brackets, we're not going to enter a simple 3, we're going to enter a 3 colon to include the whole range of what's after the third slash. And now finally, because this actually splits the whole path into the different elements all included into a list, well, in order to get that final path, we need to join back these elements thanks to the join function. And in order to make that final join, we're going to do that at the beginning. We're going to first enter in quotes again the slash, and then after a dot, we're going to add the join function, which will take that whole split we just did. And that will give you exactly the file key. All right, perfect. So now, next step. Now the next step is to create what we call an S3 Client object, which will allow us to interact with the S3 service. And so here, we're going to introduce a new variable, which we're going to call S3, which represents that S3 Client object, and which we will initialize thanks to the Boto3 library, from which we're going to call the client function, which will take as argument in quotes S3. Okay? And that's just basically to open the connection with S3. All right, then next step. The next step is to fetch the CSV object from S3. And to do so, I'm going to introduce a new variable, which I'm going to call CSV Object, all right, which will represent the CSV object. And in order to fetch that CSV object, it's super simple. We're first going to call our S3 Client object, which we've just initialized before here, from which we're going to call the get object function, and which will exactly get our CSV file object. And in that function, we need to enter two arguments. First is bucket, which will be, of course, our bucket name variable we define here, initialized here. And the second argument, as you might guess, will be the key, which is exactly going to be our file key. All right, that's exactly why we got first the bucket name and then the file key. Okay, good. Now, next step. Now, the next step is to read the CSV content of our CSV file. We were just able to get the object, which is our CSV file itself, and now we're finally going to start reading what's inside our CSV file. And so here, I'm going to introduce a new variable, which I'm going to call CSV_string, you know, just to say that we're going to read now the strings inside our CSV file. And to get basically the body of our CSV file, well, we're first going to take our CSV object, CSV obj, and then in a pair of square brackets, we're going to enter in quotes body, which is of course the whole content of the CSV file, you know, the body containing all the rows and the different columns separated by commas. And then we're going to add a dot, and then we're going to call the read function, just in order to read the whole body of the CSV file. And then finally, we just need to add dot decode, and then in parentheses in quotes UTF-8, just to decode the byte string into a UTF-8 encoded string, because actually the read function here reads the content of the stream into a string of bytes. And so we had to add this decode here in order to get the UTF-8 encoding. Okay, then next step. So now the next step is to create what we call a CSV reader, which will take our CSV string that we've just created and will convert it into a format that will be easily manipulated by Python. So we have to do it, and that's why I'm introducing that new variable, which I'm going to call CSV reader. And to create such a reader, we're going to first take the CSV library, from which we're going to call the reader function, which will exactly create that CSV reader, and which will take as input string, there you go, the first one here, StringIO of our CSV, there you go, string. So what does StringIO CSV string do? Well, it will create an in-memory stream for our CSV string content collected before, which will allow basically the CSV reader to just read from the string as if it were a file, all right? And then we just had to add here delimiter equals in quotes semicolon to just specify that the fields inside the CSV are separated by semicolons. And now, no worries, we're almost done. I know this is a bit technical, and besides, it's so much better to use Pandas, but here we go with the next step. The next step is to simply extract the headers and the data from our CSV reader. And so we're going to start with the headers. I'm introducing that new variable, which will contain the headers. And to get them, it's super simple. We can just get them with the next function, which will take as input, of course, our CSV reader. So that will exactly get the first row from our CSV reader, which contains exactly the headers of our CSV file. And then to get the data, meaning all the rows, you know, all the data points, well, we're going to introduce this time the data variable, and we're going to put all the rows of all the different data points through a one-line for loop, just like so. So we're going to do row for all the rows in our CSV reader. Perfect. And now, very final step, we finally return the headers first and then the data. And there you go, my friends. We are done implementing from scratch a read CSV from S3 function, but you're probably thinking like me that we're much better off with Pandas.
Now make sure to check out these videos on the right or the full course in the description to continue your learning, and I look forward to seeing you there.